Hello, and welcome to this next installment in video mini tours through the Metzger Collection. Today we have the exciting opportunity to dive into the theme of language and writing and tracing through various artifacts and pieces within the Metzger Collection that highlight that theme. And so as we start, we're going to come to this section of prehistory and of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia regarded as the cradle of civilization. And one of the reasons it is, and one of the hallmarks of civilization, is the invention of writing. And so in the case here, we have various tablets of the earliest form of human writing called cuneiform. It's believed that it's possibly developed out of pictographs, and we come to various pieces like this. You also see some on the statues up here, as well as various other tablets, including the Gilgamesh epic, the Code of Eshnunna, and so on. Now, the cuneiform is named after, or is from the Latin word cuneus, which means wedge. And so what would happen is a stylus was pressed into the soft clay with creating this wedge-shaped imprint. And the various patterns of this would be associated with various characters or symbols. And so that is our very first form of human writing. Now, scholars have been able to decipher this cuneiform largely through the discovery of what's called the Behestan inscription, which is a three translation piece on a cliff face. It's basically the Mesopotamian version of the Rosetta Stone, and that is the item we turn to next. Now, the Rosetta Stone, it has three distinct scripts on it. The top being Egyptian hieroglyphics, the middle, a demotic or everyday script of Egyptian, and the bottom is Greek. Now, this was discovered in the year 1799 by Napoleon's French troops in Egypt. And when they discovered it, scholars, of course, knew very well how to read Greek, even this type of Greek, all in capitals. No spaces between the words. My understanding is they had made some headway into this demotic script, but they had absolutely no idea how to decipher hieroglyphics. It was a complete mystery. And so very quickly they realized all three of these are saying the exact same thing, talking about a Greek pharaoh over Egypt named Ptolemy V. And so using these other two languages, they were eventually able to unlock hieroglyphics. Well, it was no simple task. It took them over 19 years to figure it out. And the eventual key to unlocking hieroglyphics came in the name Ptolemy itself, which they found that the proper name of the king, his cartouche, is circled. So that's the name Ptolemy right there, as well as over here and up here. And it's quite easy to find it in the Greek. Here is one instance, Tolomeo, work their way outwards and unlock this language. Now, through that is, of course, the ability to unlock Egyptian history. So whether that is deciphering the Book of the Dead, as we have it here, translating various tablets, even things like Pharaoh's cup that we have up here. The artifacts, the temples, the pyramids are laced with hieroglyphics, and now scholars could actually read what it was all talking about and piece together an understanding of Egyptian history, and through Egypt really piece together a chronology of the whole ancient Near Eastern world. Now, as we continue on, we come to a picture. And if we take a closer look, you will come to the realization that, in fact, it is a picture made out of Hebrew characters. And in fact, it's a picture of the modern cityscape of Jerusalem, comprised entirely of the book of Psalms in Hebrew. And this picks up on a tradition, an art style called micrography. which was a Jewish art form developed in the 9th century that creates pictures out of small Hebrew letters. So this one in particularly is quite striking. Now, our next piece is also not an artifact per se. It's not even a piece of art, but it's rather a chart. This is an alphabet chart that traces some of the early Semitic scripts that we have, and possibly the pictorial origins of the Semitic scripts. And then it sort of traces down to Greek, Latin, and Arabic equivalents of these. And so what we can see here is for the Aleph, the ox head, we can trace how that letter has looked through various pieces. The Beit, and Aleph Beit is where we get the word alphabet. Beit is the Hebrew word for house, tracing that all the way down. And this links to various artifacts, and we actually have some of these artifacts. So the Gezer calendar that we have there, we have over here. So this is believed to be the earliest artifact with ancient Hebrew written on it. And it describes the calendar or the seasons of the year by agricultural tasks. We next also have the Mesha stele, this one up here. And down here is the Mesha stele, also known as the Moabite stone, which is dated to around 835 BC. Then we have the Siloam inscription, this one here, and this is the Siloam inscription written at the entrance to Hezekiah's tunnel at the pool of Siloam within Jerusalem. And then we also have the Isaiah scroll, and I'll come to that later on. Now this we can use as a way to first transliterate and then translate the text of some of these ancient artifacts. And so feel free using that to try your hand at this. This fragment of an inscription that you can make out. Pause here if you want to try to figure it out yourself, but otherwise you will find Yod, Resh, Shin, Lamed, Mem, and ancient Hebrew written without vowels. And so these are the equivalent of Y, R, S, L, M, in other words, Jerusalem. Next, we turn to one of the most significant artifacts that we have in the Metzger collection, and also quite fascinating as it relates to this theme of language and writing. So this is done by King Cyrus of Persia, and the text allows displaced or exiled peoples from under the Babylonians to return to their homelands, rebuild their temples. It's sort of this decree of religious freedom and political tolerance. It also has significant impact for the Jewish history and relates to the biblical narrative of return from exile. In terms of language and writing, though, it's quite fascinating that it's done in a cylinder form. And so the idea behind this is it was made of a handheld size that could be taken city to city, and then over a scroll or over a soft piece of clay could be rolled to produce a copy of the text. And so this isn't the only one of its kind. We also have a Neo-Babylonian cylinder like that, but this early innovative way to copy in the ancient world. Now next, I want to move into our room here of Asian cultures and civilizations. and particularly talk about the Chinese, who are well known for their inventiveness, their innovations in technology that far exceeded and surpassed the West really until the modern period. And so, especially on the theme of writing and language, we have wood blocks with Chinese characters on them. And so long before Gutenberg's revolutionary printing press of movable type, by 600 AD, the Chinese had constructed a printing system of their own, engraving detailed symbols and pictures on movable wooden blocks that copied to pieces of paper when brushed with ink. Now, Chinese characters themselves acted as symbols or ideograms similar to cuneiform and hieroglyphics. And so this particular image that we have here is from the 10th century, and such printing was often used for printing the Confucian classics. Next, we're going to continue into Greece and particularly talk about Alexander the Great, who we have here. Now, I'm sure you're already familiar with Alexander the Great, this incredible military strategist and conquering all the way into northern India, and this Macedonian empire that spanned across the Mediterranean world. Now, a central element to Alexander's campaigns was the Hellenization of the various countries, the establishment of Greek culture and language. And so this is firmly established within the Macedonian Empire. But interestingly, once we come to the Roman Empire and the Romans rise to power, they not only adopted Hellenistic culture, including its art, music, and philosophy, but Greek remained the common tongue. And the fact that the New Testament was written in Greek is significant because it gave incredible diverse people within the empire the opportunity to understand and receive the Gospels. Now, within this Roman section, I'd particularly like to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, the very famous Dead Sea Scrolls, sometimes talked as the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century. And so the replica we have on display here is that of the Isaiah scroll, which is the most complete out of all of them, dated to between 125 and 100 BC. Now, the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls is that these were, this is the earliest biblical texts that we possess. And what it has shown us is an affirmation and appreciation of the diligent scribal work and meticulous scribal work of these, what are believed to be Essenes in this Qumran community, who stored these scrolls in pottery jars like we have here, likely as they were fleeing from the Romans. Now we're going to continue over into our section, jump ahead to the Middle Ages. These are two panels from the Lindisfarne Gospels. This first one is called an incipit page. So the first letters, the beginning of this one is the Gospel of Mark. And this is then called a carpet page for the Gospel of Luke. We have a full facsimile of this, in fact, too. And so the way it's organized, it's the four Gospels. And so we have the evangelist, along with, here is Luke, along with the symbol associated with the evangelist coming out of Ezekiel and Revelation, the four creatures out of the around the throne, followed by the carpet page, and then the incipit page, and then continues into the text. So we have this for Matthew as well. There we are, followed by the carpet and incipit page. Then we have Mark, associated with the lion, followed by the carpet and incipit page. And then lastly, we have John. Followed by the carpet and incipit page. Now this is the work of Eadfrith, an English monk, and it's dated to around 700 AD, and shows this insular style or Celtic illuminated manuscript style. Now, notable, the text, primary text is Latin, but in around 950 AD, another monk and scholar, whose name was Aldred, translated this into Old English, into Anglo-Saxon English. And so hopefully you can see that there. And so already by this time, by the 10th century, the Gospels had been translated into Old English. And that is part of the interest and fascination of the Lindisfarne Gospels. Now, of course, such translations were rare and literacy was rare. And so in that kind of context, the importance of cathedrals really become evident, and particularly this paper model of Chartres Cathedral as we have here can't quite do the stained glass of it justice. And so we have a miniature of the North Rose window of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. And so the stained glass, the statues of the cathedral allowed the cathedral to be, as it were, a picture book, where depictions of biblical accounts are intermingled with symbolism and recent historical events and figures that illiterate people could read. And so the windows bathed the walls with reflections of rich blues, yellows, reds, and purples, and would have filled viewers with humble awe, just as they, in fact, continue to do today. Now, this idea of picture books, we might think of things like picture can say 1,000 words, and so the richness and depth of such pictures, and yet there is a limitation in pictures as well. And so there is this work to translate the Bible and access the Bible. And John Wickliffe, who we have here, is one of the forerunners of the Reformation. And so we come to his translation here. And so he took up this task and was passionate for this cause, that his fellow countrymen should have access to the Word of God. And so he began to translate the Bible from Latin into English. This is in the 14th century. When Rome opposed the vulgarity of such an endeavor, Wickliffe argued that Moses heard God's law in his own tongue, so did Christ's apostles. Now, Wickliffe died before completing his translation of the New Testament. But just over 100 years later, William Tyndale took up the cause, and he began translating the New Testament, now no longer just from the Latin, but in fact from the original Greek. And he was accused of heresy by the church and was tried and executed. Yet the damage, so to speak, quote unquote, had been done, and the Bible had found its way into English hands. And so his translation is much of the basis of the later King James Bible, which we have a facsimile here. That's from 1611, and we even have an original leaf of that one in the collection as well. And we have various other translations into other languages. And Martin Luther is particularly known for his translation into German. Now, all of these were enabled, and is in fact the spread of such translations and of access to the Bible was through the work of this man, Johannes Gutenberg, and his invention of, you can't quite see it very well here, let's see if I can get a different angle, his invention of the Gutenberg printing press. That's a miniature model of it. And this revolutionized texts, revolutionized printing, enabled a spike in literacy. And so here we have the Gutenberg Bible, printed in 1454 or 1455. It was the first book published using the printing press. And so this arguably enabled the Reformation to happen. And this, when we think of mass production, we shouldn't really think of printing today. The way this was produced is each page had a frame, individual letters within the frame, and lead letters, placed mirror image, and then once they had set that all up, which would take quite a bit of time, you could print 1,000 copies of that page, and then move on to the next page. So it's still very laborious, but this significantly reduced the price of text and gave people access to it. Now, thinking about this, and particularly the biblical text in people's hands, it makes me think and marvel how history reveals people's desire to express and communicate with each other through writing, and how incredible that God would choose to reveal himself to us through the written word. And as I think about all these different translations that emerged, I think about the passage in Revelation 7:9. After this, I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes, all peoples, and languages, standing before the throne. And so that concludes this session on language and writing. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you'll stay tuned for our next session.